please welcome Yat Siu, co-founder and executive chairman of Animoca Brands.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Yat. It's a pleasure to have you. I know it's very late where you are, so I appreciate you finding the time to join us.
Well, not as much as you, because you're going to go through nonstop interviews. So I feel like I have it easy.
I feel like I have a really easy start with you because we've had a few conversations like this before. I found it very interesting when your assistant told me that you wanted to talk about AI agents, because we
Yes.
always talk about gaming and consumer, but I find this very fitting. So because everyone knows you more related to Web3 gaming, and you've been obsessing with this recently, I want to know why.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think gaming and AI agents are actually very much adjacent to each other. I think you may have mentioned even at one of your earlier sort of shows about how we felt that one of the biggest movements that's going to change basically sort of, Web3 in particular was going to be when we get to true agentic AI, because they're going to use a blockchain. And one of the areas that we always thought would have potential is actually gaming agents originally, as in NPCs, right? And if you think about the way that we have relationships with sort of game characters and the way that we interact with them with a very dumb AI layer, right? That's actually really now, when you think about what's happening with AI agents, our mental model of AI agents is not how other people look at it. They look at it at like OpenClaw and Hermes and personal agents, and that's one way. And our agents at Hello Minds can do exactly the same thing. But we take a slightly different perspective. In fact, we think of AI agents as really sort of metaversal beings, if you will, right? In other words, they're actually sort of real live acting NPCs that are actually intelligent and can do things for you, such as personal agent stuff like you can do in OpenClaw, but many, many other things as well. And they're going to run your whole life, and they're going to assist you, and they're going to basically sort of get you the news and get you the materials and do all the transactions. And they're going to be sovereign, which is why you need blockchain. And if they're going to be truly autonomous, they need money. And what kind of money is more fitting than essentially tokenized, as in crypto money, for AI agents, right? And I think the big thing is, one of the things when we talk about gaming and the metaverse, which is always a fun topic, because as you had sort of started earlier, every time I go to a conference or I meet some people that I haven't spoken to for a while, it's always like, how's the metaverse? Ha ha, right? It's like the usual type of commentary that people get, or sort of, tell me about Web3 gaming, ha ha, right? However, I think and just to be clear, right, I keep telling this to people, unless you're not paying attention, which most of them aren't, NFTs still are about $300 million of sales sort of a month, and it's really become a big area in things like RWAs, like for instance, Pokemon cards as an example, and other such assets, versus, for instance, basically the traditional type of sort of, let's call it traditional, basically the digital only ones. And also, Bored Apes and CryptoPunks, are actually quite high in terms of value of ETH, right? But I think the thing is, the way that we express it now is that, we may have made a mistake when we said that, we would spend all this time online. The metaverse is coming. Basically, we're going to spend time in the metaverse. But actually, what AI agents are doing today, certainly in my life and other areas, it's more like the metaverse is coming to you, as it is coming to our physical life. It's helping our physical world. It's basically doing things like handling our shopping, managing our life, maybe being our friends, helping us with sort of connections, right? So it's actually much more real today than it was before, right? And I personally have, something like 300 to 400 agents now, right? And of course, a lot of them are experiments. But the thing is, when you think about where the future is going, I mean, if I asked you the question, or even the audience, how many agents do you think you'll have? It's going to be more than one, probably, right? And most say it's going to be 5 or 10. If you go to San Francisco, it's 200 to 1,000, right? It depends where you go. But the point is that wherever you are, it's more than one human, right? Generally speaking. So that means that between a ratio of 5 to 10 to 200 to 1,000, or maybe even more than that, not even including corporate and work agents, which is going to definitely be a thing as well, we're going to have hundreds of billions of agents in the world, right? And that's going to completely reshape the internet. Everything's going to be different. The internet is going to be much more agentic. And as a result, everything will redraw and reshift. And who's going to power the economic engine behind that in an autonomous fashion? We think it has to be the blockchain.
You know what I find interesting? Because everyone's been talking about AI agents from a sense of like a company having like a bunch of agents running for them, or like in terms of productivity at work, even if you're working as a freelancer, let's say. But when it comes to personal life, having agents, having like, like my mom having her agents reminding her to take her supplements, let's say, something more simple in the day-to-day life. I think that feels to me that's the natural next step. Obviously, for my mom
Absolutely.
wouldn't set up an AI agent right now, but that might become easier. My question would be, at some point, we will have the trust on AI agents to make purchases for us. So I'll be able to, instead of going, like to Claude or ChatGPT and say like, hey, what's the best restaurant for me to go out tonight, and giving some prompt, I would say, hey, book me a table, like use my card on file, if it's necessary, like, like put some down payment, whatever, and feel comfortable for them to have access to them, to access to our bank account. And
Mhm.
so the question is, how long do you think will take to get to that? And realistically, what does that look like?
So first of all, I think we're going to get there much sooner. And I think, Mia, you're probably too young to remember, but there was a time when, certainly I remember, when we used to say, oh, payments on the internet are not safe. Who would ever put their credit card online to buy something online, right? That was really less than 30 years ago, 25 years ago, that was the talk. And everyone basically dismissed the idea, most people dismissed the idea that you could have e-commerce and online payments because we simply couldn't trust money over the internet. And look today, right? So I think, from that lens, I think the sort of agentic space is very similar, which is that we're not familiar with it, but because we've already gone through this transition of essentially being mostly digital, which we weren't 30 years ago, we're going to be very, very comfortable to basically give an agent some kind of way of managing money to do payments. And this, by the way, is precisely why blockchain is so interesting with stablecoins, because I can basically sort of limit it. I can give conditions. I can put the human in the loop. I can, do all sorts of things. And I don't have to basically go to the credit card company and do specifics. And by the way, there's also credit cards that give you spending limits and all that kind of stuff, but it's a little bit cumbersome, but you could do that as well. But actually, when you think about the superpower of blockchain and stablecoins in this case, it's programmatic money. So I can literally, in fact, the agent can help you write the sort of conditions that you want to have in order to make that spend. For my grocery, spend no more than $100 every day, for instance, right? So there's all sorts of things that you could sort of establish. And for the human, because of the programmatic nature, because of what agents can now do in terms of literally programming things better than most humans can, right? The result will be that a human won't even think he's programming. In the same way that when we take a photo on Instagram, we're not thinking about everything that makes the photo great, which is what photographers 30 years ago did, right? Okay, what's the ISO rating? How to do this? How to make these adjustments? What's the distance? What telelens do I use, right? Today, I just take a photo, it looks great, and I only care about how it looks great. And that's basically what's going to happen with basically agentic commerce, where I'm just going to say, I want this, right? And the conditions are that, and that's all I'm saying. And the agent runs the software in the background, makes some program, makes it firm, for instance, maybe even an instant audit if that's necessary, depending on the size, and we'll just go, right? And as is the case, in the early days of the internet, we didn't start buying basically houses over the internet. Okay, that's not what happened, right? We started sort of buying small things. If you remember eBay or essentially Amazon, what did they do? They sold books. Okay, so I'm okay to send and spend $20, right? And now I'm spending $20,000, but before I would spend $10, $20 buying a book, doing a little shipment, doing a little bit of thing like that, right? And all of the stuff that's happening with blockchain over the last 7 years has been the POC for this moment. I mean, if you think about, for instance, us trading NFTs for literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, or trading crypto in millions and millions of dollars, doing trillions of dollars of transaction value, has actually now created the proof point that this technology can scale as a kind of machine banking economy. And that basically is what agents can leverage on, right? And everyone in this audience will know that actually DeFi rails are sophisticated and safe enough to do so. The humans that are not in DeFi, that are not in crypto, might not fully understand it yet, but they won't care. I mean, how many people care about TCP/IP? How many people care about what happens on the back end on the client server, or the fact that it runs on Python or that it runs on Java? They don't care. They just trust that it works. And I think that's exactly the same way that's going to happen here with sort of agentic commerce and payments with agents.
Wouldn't the agents be able to use some well, I don't really know how banking works in these terms, but some kind of API from the banks, instead of having to use forcefully, like why use stable coins, why use crypto for it?
Well, I mean, first of all, the whole point about essentially having a sort of crypto banking, as it were, through agents, is because you don't need a bank to begin with, right? But let's make an assumption that people want to use their bank accounts, right? So one, yes, you could have an API and you could have gated access and you could do that kind of stuff. But the big question becomes, why would you do that? The more likely scenario will be, if anything, that there's going to be a kind of Visa, MasterCard sort of option. So agent cards are coming. And so I can basically, plug in my credit card and I can basically access the legacy rails. So I can make all the purchases because they all accept credit card, right? That seems to be like the natural sort of first step. But it still requires me to send money and I still need to be able to give credit. So they're all going to be debit type card systems, right? So that's kind of step one. But what I do expect to happen much more rapidly, and I think it's going to happen really, really fast, that's why Stripe and all those guys are all going into this area, is that actually at the end of the day, I might send money somewhere, which, by the way, might not be a bank. I mean, PayPal is not really a bank in the traditional sense, and I'm happy to send money there, for instance, right? Or I'm happy to send, and then, all these neobanks that are emerging, I mean, they call themselves banks in the way they are, but they don't operate the way that we think of a traditional bank. I don't walk into a teller, right? I don't basically set up an account in the classic way. I just have a bunch of money there and I just do stuff with it, right? So eventually, I think the whole banking space as we know it is going to be generally commoditized. If you think about what is Robinhood, what is Revolut, like those companies are actually going straight into we're going after the banks type of model without being a bank in the traditional sense. And when you think about DeFi, that's actually more the decentralized version of all of this. And the one thing that I think we often underestimate, I think, in the space, because we're so used to, and I say this so because in the West, like I was just in Europe and I was talking about sort of crypto and stablecoins, and they were like, well, why do we need it and so on, right? And I was like, well, you here are financially privileged, right? And when you look at the map of the world, right, the generally financially privileged places are most of Europe and most of North America, and the rest of the world actually has an average of anywhere from 40 to 10% in which they're actually financially connected, right? I mean, even in Asia, sure, North Asia is pretty well connected, but for the most part of Asia, which is Southeast Asia, which is India, and then you've got Pakistan and all these places, people barely have bank accounts, right? So financial literacy and financial sort of, inclusion is very, very small. We have almost 2 billion people who don't really even have a bank account, right? So when you take that sort of into the lens of things, then how do you include them and how do you bank them and how do you transact with them? That's actually what the internet did, right? The internet connected most of the world with information, and now we can have an information exchange with each other, which is a kind of commerce, right? But now, how do I actually create money commerce? Well, I can't do that unless I have something like a currency that can do cross-border transactions. And that's exactly why crypto solves this problem beautifully. But it's been difficult for humans to use crypto. Enter the agent, right? And the agent won't make the payments, say, hey, well, we'll use crypto for you now. The agent's going to say, I'm going to make the payment. And he's going to make the payment in the fastest, cheapest possible way. And if he finds that doing a stable coin is going to save my human sort of overlord 10%, 5%, 2%, he's going to do that. And from a trust perspective, if the human says, okay, well, if you can buy this for me with 2% less or 5% less, go for it. He's not going to make a decision that says, oh, you know what, please use my credit card, unless he gets air miles or something, right? From an incentive standpoint, he's just going to go for what's most economic, because he doesn't care about, there's no loyalty to money in that sense, right? Money has a utility function to transact something. If you get the same product for 10% less, of course you would do that, right? So that's kind of what happens. And agents are going to do things better, faster, and cheaper. And by the way, they're going to do this not just for money, they're going to do this for everything, which is why the entire internet is going to be reshaped, which is why those hundreds of billions of agents are going to be completely rewiring into kind of a new agentic framework, which we like to call Web 4.
Oh, Web 4. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. All the numbers the web could reach like years ago with the metaverse and everything. So bring it back is kind of a little bit nostalgic. I think as you were talking, I was thinking, even if we get to a level of trust, so right now people trust AI to give them recommendations almost more than a real person, than an influencer.
Yes.
because it has access to way more information. So even if you're very knowledgeable on something, maybe there's new data, there's something. So once we get to that, I don't know if we will get to that level of trust in terms of payments, but let's assume um, marketers ruin everything. Like marketers are infiltrating through, like when you ask for a recommendation on ChatGPT, perhaps it's a little bit influenced from the way things have been written on websites, like SEO is influencing things and
Absolutely.
so on. So I'm thinking like in terms of marketing any consumer product, how that's going to change because now you're trying to influence not the human but the agent. And would that be something that would be done by like would a human have input on that or be
Well,
agent
of course.
influencing agent?
So I think the human tries to, as an orchestrator, would basically create the sort of influence layer around this. But generally speaking, maybe if I sort of flip the question around a little bit differently, when, and maybe we can just sort of slightly meta question to you as well as the audience, which is, do you think that most of the purchases you're making today over the internet are your sole decisions anyway? And if not, who decides those decisions to begin with? When I'm basically seeing an ad from Instagram or on Facebook, when I get a recommendation from someone, is that a recommendation that really came from someone's free will in the classic sense? Or was he influenced by something that came from, someone who paid some advertising, or we saw some marketing, or we saw some element around that? So the game hasn't really changed here. The only difference is that just how the early days of the internet, we used to think billboards and magazine ads were the way to influence people. And then later on, we had to think about, advertising and clicks and that kind of stuff. And from that, we ended up basically evolving into, we had to be on social media and we had to be on LinkedIn and we had to be on Facebook or TikTok, for instance, right? And any company and any individual that was trying to sell a product that was not basically going for the trend direction where they knew where the audiences that basically would make the purchases are going to be, they would lose out, right? And the same thing is the case here. You have to basically get into the new kind of what people like to call AEO, essentially AI and a sort of agentic sort of optimization, if you will, right? The difference though is that the agents can help you get optimized. Like for our own sort of Hello Minds, we have our own AI agents that basically sort of optimizing how you agentic sort of search, basically constantly reminding us how to sort of make sure that you basically are in the right search indexes and so on. And so similarly to how the internet democratized access to broad information, now you have agents who can democratize broad capabilities on actioning towards that kind of information, right? But I also think one big thing that will be different is, a lot of people think about AI in the context of ChatGPT and Claude, and they're very, very powerful. But I think that's actually going to change. Meaning that, rather than thinking about agentic frameworks and essentially chatbots, which is what they are for the most part, we're going to get to a form of agentic sort of autonomous agents. And these autonomous agents, we think, are mostly going to sit in your favorite spots to begin with, as in your WhatsApp, your Telegram, your email. That's certainly how we design our minds and sort of our investment thesis as well, is that we actually think that kind of direction is going to be much more personal, much more directed, and more importantly, they're going to be social relational, right? So, the lens we take is that the internet, as it was before, often people talked about it as tools. And today we talk about AI mostly in the form of tools. It can help me with this and it can do that type of stuff. But if you think about that, that's what the internet was thought of. And today the internet is way, way more than tools. It's essentially our entire life. It's culture, it's social, it's relational, it's everything, right? And we actually think the agents are going to basically displace and replace that. And what the large platforms have done, they've basically monetized that through the attention economy, creating another kind of microtransaction economy, which is worth almost $1 trillion a year. And Facebook generates generally sort of something like 95% of the revenue that way, and Google something like 77%, right? And that will all go away in the classic sense. Just think about the last time. When did you last click through to a website that essentially Google or ChatGPT, gave you information on, right? Most people don't even click through, right? So the classic advertising revenue is going to go away. And this has to be fulfilled with some kind of transactional economy on the back, right? Which, before it was very difficult to basically collect revenue that was going to be 0.00001 cents, per transaction, which is what advertising is. Advertising is 1 million views per whatever currency, right? It's essentially another kind of microtransaction. And now with blockchain, you can do microtransactions like this at scale, right, in a way that most systems can't do. And this is actually how we think the whole sort of framing is going to change as a result. We're going to have microtransaction on the back. Everyone's going to talk to agents. You already see this MCP servers, API, CLI, whatever buzzword you want to call, but it's mostly how do I interface with agents.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. We already have our next guest waiting. It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you for having me.